Who would like to begin our discussion on our case study, the Mothman Chronicles?
Well, I thought it was interesting that this morning we talked about like illness anxiety, because I was also thinking about that when I don't remember the name, but the friend Gordon, I think, was like, oh, like I must have a brain tumor, like, and went to go, and I think I was super stressed out about that.
Yeah.
Just like a slight parallel from this morning's discussion.
Actually, let's take the parallel and go off on a tangent.
Oh, okay.
So, geometry humor. Illness anxiety disorder, as I alluded to this morning, is now categorized and published in a chapter of obsessive compulsive and related disorders. So let's start a discussion now on what is obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. So we'll start off with hopefully the most straightforward of the illnesses within this chapter. OCD, what do we know about it? How do you diagnose it?
It's intrusive thoughts when you know.
It's dysfunctional to like.
Yeah, and the compulsions normally help relieve those intrusive thoughts, and that's why you perform them.
Right.
Washing hands repeatedly, checking doors.
Right, and the patient obviously presented with any of those distressing behaviors, I think most clinicians would then default to an evaluation of intrusive thoughts that might be promoting or resulting in those behaviors. What if an individual comes in and, irrespective of what their chief complaint is, you uncover intrusive thoughts, but there are no related compulsions. So the patient's chief complaint likely then would probably be anxiety, but it doesn't have to be. What's the diagnosis here? So it's a trick question. It's still OCD. So, and it's a trick question that I think is fair game on your shelf exam, because about 10 to 20% of individuals with OCD have obsessions only, without compulsion. So that can happen. If you're asked the defense mechanism
For people with OCD.
displacement, it's kind of a form of displacement. It actually goes by a more specific name of undoing. Undoing.
Oh, I do.
Which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a compulsive act to somehow go back and neutralize.
Neutralize what? Like the feelings of anxiety?
And then perhaps even the subconscious thought or idea that's resulting in the anxiety. Sometimes we describe that process that results in that subconscious thought as isolation of affect, where an individual has this taboo thought, but is forced in some way to allow it to come to conscious expression. So you might be asked about something and it's kind of bringing up some stuff. Isolation of affect allows for the discussion of the idea, but separate from the affect, which is itself isolated in one's subconscious. So when put in such a situation, the individual can discuss something factually without being emotionally invested in it. But that unfortunately does lead to anxiety, because that isolated affect cannot stay isolated indefinitely. So it will come to conscious expression, and individuals in those situations will often have to resort to a secondary defense. And when that secondary defense is unwilling, it can manifest with compulsive behaviors. All right, so that's OCD. Can somebody name a disorder related to OCD other than illness anxiety disorder, which obviously is the whole reason why we started here? We discussed illness anxiety earlier today. That holds true. So illness anxiety would be, or should be here and will be here eventually.
Phobias?
Phobias. Phobias are not contained in obsessive compulsive, or the obsessive compulsive and related disorder chapter. They're actually, specific phobias are still found in the anxiety disorders chapter.
Like the other cluster C personality disorders, like dependent.
They're still found in the personality disorders chapter, although they're likely to be comorbid nonetheless.
Okay.
Are
earlier you mentioned body dysmorphic disorder.
Yes, somebody cheated looking at the earlier mess.
That's
Do you remember what body dysmorphic disorder is? Anybody?
It's like you have an occupation, a preoccupation with a certain fault that you think that you may have that gets to a point where it interferes with your daily life and it becomes a clinical issue.
Yeah. It's an imagined defect in appearance. Imagined defect in appearance, and just to kind of mesh over shared themes in the Mothman Chronicles, that of culturally balanced syndromes. Be very careful on the shelf exam, because when somebody comes to your clinical attention on a shelf exam with that imagined defect in appearance, if they are of adolescent age, it might be quote unquote normal behavior. Right? So you have to be careful and read the question closely and how it's actually formulated. Anybody? So, and the only reason why I bring this movie up is because I liked it, but I actually did like it. It was actually recommended to me by a third-year clerk rotating through this very clerkship. So, if anybody here likes horror and then goes and watches this movie and wonders what was on my course director's mind, just a reassurance that not only did that third-year clerk years ago give me this recommended film, but she is now on staff here. So I'm not going to mention her name, because if you have that countertransference, I don't want you from me to her either. American Mary. And there's no chance in heck that anybody here was going to raise their hand and say they've seen it. I knew that. Anybody here like horror?
I watched some because my mom watches a lot. My parents watch a lot.
Pass that one by your mom.
Well, my mom, she likes The Exorcist.
So she's so supernatural?
Yeah, and it's like in the tall grass, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Weird.
I like
Yeah, it's very weird, right?
Yeah.
I like the movie Psycho.
Classic.
It's a classic.
Slasher.
Yeah.
Well, American Mary comes from a little bit of a different perspective.
Okay.
I don't even know where the subgenre of horror would be, but if you recommend it to your family, reassure them that it was given to you by one of your peers, so one you don't know. Any other questions about body dysmorphic disorder?
How frequently do you see it on the floors?
For a consulting psychiatrist, it's rare. It's rare. I would guess outpatient ambulatory care, certainly higher prevalence in plastic surgery subspecialties.
Would you say it's also higher prevalence in in the adolescent population?
It's tough. Yeah, probably. Because there's always that the differential as to whether or not it's sanctioned, right, for that age group. Especially in 2023 when 3/4 of the time is spent on TikTok. One more disorder I want to make sure we cover in this chapter before we get back to the film, and that's hoarding disorder.
Hoarding.
With obsessions.
Hoarding used to actually be a diagnostic criterion of OCD, but due to a particular show, it became so popular, the incidents went through the roof, and the APA had to acknowledge it as its own independent illness. So hoarding disorder, which is exactly what it sounds like, is now a condition that's published in the 5th revision as of 2013.
Something like that, is that we like I remember like Leslie in Parks and Rec, her house just fully cluttered.
Yeah.
Is that something that we would classify as hoarding disorder?
If the clutter results in clinically significant distress or impairment, yes.
Okay, because she didn't seem distressed by it.
Others? I mean, is she isolated because nobody visits her? Is there depression or anxiety because she's cut off from family, because nobody visits her?
No, it's just like she just had her friends really noticed how messy her house was. So
Normal until there's evidence of clinical significant distress. Again, that's always going to be the cutoff and the line to draw, so as to not stigmatize or pathologize behavior. And even if the patient says, no, I'm fine, collateral information is very, very important here. All right, so back to the film. What else did you observe?
The whole thing about the near-death hallucinations, like, I thought that was interesting. Like, is that something that patients mention as they're actively dying a lot?
I honestly don't know. We don't get to see it that much. A lot of the times that a psychiatry consult service is on board in such situations is to make the patient comfortable, agitation. We don't get to speak to them a lot in terms of what their experiences are. And even then, the nature of that consult, or the prevalence of consults like that in this facility is low. A lot of times people are discharged to home so they feel as they want to be around family. What do we know about these experiences?
They're like collective, like the entire town is seeing these visions, which, and I know a lot of cultures have like a version of an angel of death that people see, before passing or something like that, but it's like the calling on the phone, it's seeing Mothman in person, it's like a collective hallucination of sorts. I almost thought there was like something in the water, it was like a scarecrow thing, like you poison the water supply and you start seeing these visions.
Did you just have a Dark Knight reference?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought like what was most interesting, and also how this is like based all on true stories. That like all of a sudden a lot of people were having these visions, almost like it was like a shared psychosis. But like it wasn't necessarily people were interacting with each other. It was just like multiple members of the same community having these visions, which is like a little different than shared psychosis, where normally it's like someone who has like a relationship together that had that.
Yeah. Even though shared psychosis could include perceptual disturbances, it's primarily delusions. It's a thought. It's a thought. It's a content of thought. But nonetheless, it should be in a differential diagnosis. I've been to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Did not spend. I spent 5 years in West Virginia, but not all 5 in Point Pleasant. Don't know if we could actually look at that particular town as a culture or subculture, possibly so, but it's certainly something you'd need more observation to deduce. And what I'm getting at is a comment somebody made. I mean, this is not a doppelganger, and this is not a banshee, which have rooted, cultural variance. But nonetheless, it's in the conversation.
I read that like it's not necessarily maybe that culturally significant, but at the time like the name Mothman came up, it was like Spider-Man, which was like very popular at the time, was fighting like some character that was like a super villain Moth as well, and that's kind of like where the name came from. But like who knows like how many people at that time were reading like the Superman or Spider-Man comics.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure like what the comic readership was like in the 60s.
Right, that's fair. So what else about these near-death experiences should we discuss? I mean, there's probably some neurochemistry or some neurobiology behind it. Anybody have any preliminary? Because I think the research here is new. Well, so I think it might be related, and I stress the word might, DMT.
Oh, yeah, it was a DMT model is like a near-death experience that comes on the...
It comes up.
Yeah.
One of the interesting sequelae of DMT is that people who have never met each other and maybe don't have a shared or common experience like their affinity for comics or graphic novels tend to have very, very similar experiences. Now, in this particular case, there might be a red herring in that they're all from Point Pleasant, West Virginia. That is not necessarily the case. I mean, there have been outbreaks, whatever you want to call it, where individuals were more diverse in their geography. And, you know, DMT only partially explains how someone may have this out-of-body or even out-of-worldly experience. What it doesn't get at is how in the world can that out-of-worldly experience be a shared experience between people that have never met each other in geographically diverse areas. That's where it gets a little iffy, and I'm not sure we have an answer to that yet. Of course, one answer might be borrowed from the field of psychology. What do you know about Carl Jung?
And he's on Myers-Briggs. That's not.
What did Jung propose as the topography of the unconscious?
Is this the eighth super ego?
So that's his contemporary. That's Freud,
Oh.
right? But he built on
Collective
that, so
unconscious.
you're on the right track. Absolutely.
Sometimes referred to as the object. I'm just reading this off. A segment of the deepest unconscious mind is genetically inherited, not shaped by personal experiences.
Right. So he has two constructs of the unconscious. One is the personal unconscious, which is Freudian. So he borrows it. But he differentiates himself from the teaching of Sigmund Freud, from the theories of Sigmund Freud, by also conjuring the poor choice of words. By adopting a model of the collective unconscious, which Freud never discussed. And that's this idea that we actually have inherited memories, archetypes from our ancestors. And there are Jungians practicing in 2020s. And boy, is that there a link there between what's going on in this film and perhaps the merging of two theories. One, that of Carl Jung, and the other, the theory of DMT. Because maybe DMT unlocks something in our central nervous system that opens up the door of the collective unconscious. Well, it sure as heck can be perceived as psychosis. You better believe it. So there might be some neurobiology behind this, and it might be DMT, or again, all behavior can be discussed biopsychosocially. So biologically, we'll talk about DMT, and psychosocially, we'll adopt the theories of Carl Gustav Jung. I don't know if DMT is going to appear on your exam, right? Ayahuasca is a naturally occurring plant. South America, Peru. Watch football. It's Aaron Rodgers, the currently injured Jet quarterback, who may or may not be coming off the IR in a couple of weeks.
Experimental surgery, we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens, exactly. Jeff Vance holding out hope.
Go through the Achilles release surgery.
Is peyote, does it act in the same way as ayahuasca? Like in the
To my knowledge, yes. To my knowledge, yes. The other thing may or may not come up on exams, DMT is relatively inactive, and it's usually activated in the gut by, or it's deactivated by monoamine oxidase. So if you take it with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, you're going to get the hallucinogenic effects, which is why ayahuasca is usually brewed in a tea with a vine, the name of which I don't know. But I'm Peruvian. That contains MAOI. I don't know if we catch this character drinking tea in this film at all, but there might be a role of his own endogenous DMT, because it's a naturally occurring molecule, right? Suspect to be secreted by the pineal gland. All right, what else do we have here? By the way, any Disney fans here?
Depends on movie.
Same.
So a Disney film that is likely a DMT trip.
Well, really, film but a movie, not but a TV show like Miss Marvel.
Oh, Alice in Wonderland.
That's LSD. There's no way I can flip Alice in Wonderland as DMT. That's a massive trick from start to end. By the way, I mean, I don't want to get into metaphors like down the rabbit hole, but what is Alice doing just before she follows down that rabbit?
She's running.
Huh?
She's reading?
Reading?
Wait, no, that's her sister.
She's running.
She's like in a tree or something.
She falls down the tree.
Oh, wait, that's right.
Well, before she goes down the rabbit
She's
hole.
chasing the rabbit.
Before she chases the rabbit down the rabbit hole.
She eats food.
She had a concussion.
Yeah, she's making, right, she's TBI. No. No, she's actually making the daisy chain, which is interesting because there's a species of daisy, the morning glory, the seeds of which are used to synthesize a chemical that is very, very, very similar to LSD. So it is a daisy chain.
Do you think any of these directors or they know
No,
any of the stuff that they're
just-
doing?
No, I think that was just dumb luck. Yeah, that's
Really?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
That feels too specific.
Really?
It's too coincidental.
No, I don't know. That's just
There's a lot of coincidences in the universe. Yeah.
What Disney movie is it?
Oh, back at the end tape? Is anybody? Pinocchio.
Ow.
Yeah, he's visited by an angel in the middle of the night upon falling asleep. Okay? When you fall asleep, DMT is going to surge at 3:30 a.m. And just before going to sleep, of all things he's smoking, tobacco does contain NALI. Many people who actually see a creature will often talk about they're having a blue aura. And again, I think Walt Disney just fortunately picks the blue angel.
Everything
the
is
blue,
the
the
blue
blue
fairy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
So again, it could have been green, it could have been pink. It just was dumb luck.
So none of this was ever intentional.
We don't have Walt Disney around to ask. At least not until he's unfrozen. All right, it's DMT. That's let's talk a little bit more about hallucinogens since we're off on this tangent. And it will come up on your exam. So there are three different subtypes of hallucinogens. One we named, that's LSD. Psilocybin is in the same subclass as LSD as well, which is what? What's the subclass there? That's called psilocybin, mushrooms. And,
Alpha, beta, adrenergic.
well, that's way too many syllables. I was thinking psychedelics.
Oh.
Yeah, psychedelics.
Did we mention LSD?
LSD and psilocybin are psychedelics. On the other hand, DMT, along with PCP, is what subtype? Dissociative. And the third subtype are your deliriums. Deliriums. So usually molecules, substances that have anticholinergic and or antihistaminic quality, deliriums. And of course, some of these drugs don't need to fit into a single category. They can certainly cause delirium or induce delirium as well as be classified as a psychedelic. So, but generally speaking, there are three subclasses or subcategories of hallucinogens. Hallucinogens do not have an identified physiologic withdrawal phase. So on your shelf exam, you are not likely to see a clinical vignette for which hallucinogen withdrawal is a single best answer. But you should be able to identify hallucinogen intoxication. Okay, so breaking it down, what does a psychedelic LSD intoxication look like?
Well, just from history, beginning or part of a patient is like seeing things that aren't really there and perhaps not really responsive to your interview at all.
Responding to a stimuli that, I don't know if it's internal or external stimuli.
Very vibrant.
Right. You think sensory, right? Think sensory, including crossover too, called synesthesia,
Oh, yeah.
right? So they can taste colors, they can see sounds. Right? And then the physical symptoms are going to look like panic. Yeah. It looks like a panic attack, physiologically as well, right? So physiologic plus perceptual disturbances that are somewhat unique to LSD intoxication in terms of sensory, things changing shape and perception. Again, depth perception, general, a lot of people who were high in PCP in the 60s did jump off of roofs, and they were not necessarily due to suicide attempts. It was due to the fact that it looked like it was just a step or two down.
And what is the treatment for LSD intoxication?
Supportive.
Supportive. No benzodiazepines or benzodiazepines.
If
It's a supportive measure.
It's a supportive measure, yeah. As a supportive measure. If there's overwhelming anxiety, panic, you certainly attempt to avoid it with benzo. Yeah, supportive in general. Yeah. PCP. So now jumping to the dissociative. PCP. What does PCP intoxication look like?
Agitation, combativeness,
Yeah.
vertical nystagmus.
Good.
No fear of like pain.
Right. Right. So who here has seen the Terminator? Listen to those today's film.
I guess it's just part of it. Part of it only.
Part of what?
Part of the Terminator only. I've
What?
only seen part of it.
Which part?
I don't even remember, just at the beginning.
All right, this is your assignment over Thanksgiving. Not really. One of the infamous scenes in the Terminator is the police station scene, which is actually introduced by Arnold's infamous tagline, "I'll be back." Right. So he leaves. So he's searching for Sarah and Reese. They are in there. They're in the precinct. Of course, he's trying to hunt them down. He's told, "Go away. I'll be back." Then camera switches over to Reese and Sarah in the precinct, and they're trying to impress upon a couple of detectives that they are being persecuted by a cyborg from the future, which, as I say it out loud, doesn't really sound all that reality-based.
Yeah.
Right? And both of them are chirping. Right. So, consistent with perhaps an element from the Mothman Chronicles, there seems to be a dynamic of shared psychosis here. So, what is the next best step in such a case?
Detox. Detox.
Detox, okay. Even before the detox.
Would we separate the two?
Yeah.
Oh.
Separate the two. Yeah. That's exactly what they do in the Terminator. Okay. Again, the writer-director think that through in terms of the evidence-based literature. I doubt it, but they nail it, right? And they also nail the subsequent script because Reese, who is the index case, is continuing to climb the walls. Sarah calms down. And in her dialogue with the detective, she actually then, and this is in the script, demonstrates fairly significant insight. Okay? And she says something, well, I'll paraphrase. I know it sounds silly, but explain to me how I saw him put his hand right through a windshield. And next line, detective, guess what?
Is he on something or something like that?
More specific.
Is he on PCP?
Yeah. If you actually go to the script and use word search, PCP is there. It actually is literally, now as soon as he says that, within seconds, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger's character driving right through the wall. And what he's about to do for the next several seconds, few minutes, is demonstrate the psychological or behavioral manifestations of acute PCP intoxication. Everything that you listed. He's belligerent, he's assaultive, he's agitated. So if you ever watch that scene, you'll never forget what PCP intoxication looks like.
On the quote. Probably on PCP, broke every bone in his hand and won't feel it for hours.
Right? Right there.
Should watch that movie.
Yeah. Now the other cool thing, you mentioned nystagmus, vertical, horizontal nystagmus, or rotary nystagmus. It comes with the physical sequelae, right? And if you look at the DSM criteria and just rearrange the physical signs and symptoms that define PCP intoxication, it actually spells out the word Terminator.
Were they thinking that through when they wrote the DSM?
There's no way you can do that. Now, there's a cheat, right? O in the acronym stands for other, which is hyperacusis. Or you could say ODO, but O is a cheat, but otherwise it's all there. It's actually the first letter of each of the rest of the criteria.
This is within the DSM-5?
DSM-5.
Okay.
I have it in a PowerPoint if you guys want me to post it on Instagram later. I know you guys are busy at 2 o'clock today, but if you want to follow Instagram tonight, you get to learn through the Terminator. Now, if that doesn't get you to rewatch this movie, I don't know what does. Back to Mothman Chronicles. What other observations do we have? Oh, by the way, no, actually, let me just take another 2 minutes. Third subset, or subclass of hallucinogens, are your deliriums, right? So delirium can be defined across the 3 C's. So this is a general classification or definition of delirium, which includes what? Whether it's induced by whatever, or whether it's due to an underlying medical condition. How do we define delirium? 3 C's. 1. And confusion here is synonymous with cognition. Right.
Combativeness.
Cognition. Yeah. So in the DSM-5, the APA is a little bit more specific. There must be at least, or deficits in at least 2 domains of cognition, one of which is concentration. Mm-hmm. Right. The second C is that the course is acute in onset and fluctuating. And then the third C, is the cause. The cause is unlike any other etiology of any other mental disorder. Because in every other mental disorder, the clinician must investigate and definitively rule out the effects of a substance or a medical condition. For delirium, it's the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. The cause is due to an underlying medical condition or the direct physiologic effects of a substance. All right. And with that, I ask your favorite Shakespeare tragedy. So we jump from the Terminator to Shakespeare.
That's mine.
Hamlet?
Hamlet.
Okay.
I was one of the characters in like middle school. I don't remember the character. Like King Hamlet's best friend or something.
What was I missed the play.
I was like King Hamlet's best friend.
Oh,
It was like,
Hamlet's
yeah, it was like something about comedy or something like that. It was like a spoof on it. That's why I was like, it's the only one I know. Maybe.
Anybody else want to share?
I don't know. Julius Caesar, it's very political. Romeo and Juliet. Macbeth.
Obviously, we got a right answer here. The correct answer is Macbeth. Right.
Oh, Lady Macbeth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why Lady Macbeth?
Just remember she was the one who convinced Macbeth to, kill the next in line to heir of Scotland, and
No,
she had,
the king.
Oh, Outdamspot? It was the Outdamspot thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, more specific than a thing.
Like when she was like trying to like clean the spot, she was saying Outdamspot.
Yes, she was. What was she doing? What was her
She
condition?
was like, I guess like delirium.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a case study of delirium. Yeah. Now again, outside this conversation, if I asked you your favorite Shakespearean play or tragedy, it's a different answer. But for the purposes of this discussion, it's Lady Macbeth, or it's Macbeth, the tragedy of Macbeth, right? Because it's a case study of delirium. By the way, before she has that infamous, what is often referred to erroneously as a sleepwalking episode, because it is delirium, her husband is also delirious, even though it's gotten less press. Because he's at a banquet, and seated at the head of the table is the ghost of his best friend that he also killed, this banquet. Yeah. Right? So he's having perceptual disturbances too. So he's already delirious, and then his wife is delirious as well. Anyway, the real reason to discuss Macbeth, not really, is the acronym I Part Lady Macbeth actually covers all the potential etiologies of delirium.
How did the acronym miss? You think that doesn't cover enough?
What's that?
There's like metabolic, infectious, structural trauma.
That's probably a little short.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, if you remind me, if somebody reminds me, I can post the I Heart Lady Macbeth acronym.
Is this on your publication on the European Society of Medicine?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I don't have to post it. The internet saves the day. All right, so that covers, finally, the primer on hallucinogens. When we're coming up, we're past the bottom of the hour, so final thoughts on the Mothman Chronicles.
I thought it was just providing an interesting look into like someone, or like an idea of a patient who's has some kind of like hallucinations or delusions, and like nobody will believe them, but they really believe them to be true, and like how like hard that must be, because like that's kind of what I thought of the character, right? Where he was even questioning himself at some times. He was like, "Am I really seeing this?" and stuff like that. So I was imagining like how patients can be like, they really do believe these things are happening, and how distressing it must be for everybody to be like, "No, it's like okay, don't worry about it," and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. I was like, wow, it must be like a crazy experience to go through.
Yeah. And your observation kind of refocuses, especially for the inpatient psychiatrist, on that delineation between delirium and psychosis. Because an individual with delirium would not be able to articulate or in any way have a coherent conversation about what they're seeing, no matter how detached from reality it is. The person with psychosis can, right? And sometimes that's a little helpful in coming up with the potential etiology of delirium versus psychosis, because of course there's significant overlap between these two conditions. A lot of people with delirium are psychotic. They actually do demonstrate elements of psychosis, like perceptual disturbances, visual hallucinations. But the coherent way in which this character describes what's going on and the insight he provides, you know, am I mad, or you know, am I losing it? It's much more consistent with a psychotic thought process than it would be delirium. All right. Any other thoughts here? We're good. All right, we'll leave it here. Signing off, and I'll.